You're listening to Taking Care of Business with Marty Pay and Clay Kerner on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.
We are back on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180. Our guest is Rick Wilson from the California Geological Survey. Clay, you had a question for Rick?
Yeah, Rick, I heard on the news this morning that a town or some trains were actually missing in Japan. Do you know anything about that?
In Japan?
Yeah.
How would that happen?
No, I hadn't heard about that. But my work is mainly with the California Emergency Management Agency through the I work for the California Geological Survey, but my primary job is to make sure that all emergency managers along the coast have all the information they need. So my efforts have been mainly in California. So I know a lot about what happened in California, and I'm still trying to catch up with what happened in Japan.
Well, I've got a place over in Pismo Beach, and I was wondering what's happening over there.
Well, the Pismo Beach area actually is very close to where one of the highest waves was recorded yesterday at Port San Luis tide gauge. So it is an area that seems to be kind of a catcher's mitt for, if you will, for tsunami waves. I think the highest recorded there was about 7.5 feet.
Wow!
I noticed they also evacuated Avila, I heard.
Yes, Avila Beach was a very, since it's so close to that area and we know a lot more about that area, it's one of those areas that we have to be very careful about. It's very, similar to Crescent City. It has a lot of the same characteristics that area has.
Who is it that makes the determination that a city or a community or a specific area should be evacuated?
That is up to the county and the city emergency managers. We work really closely with them to give them all the information, all the scientific background of an event, and all the information that's coming from our warning center up in Alaska, who is responsible for monitoring the tsunami across the ocean through a series of tide gauges and buoys that are out there in the ocean.
Rick, this is Marty again. I'm originally from the San Fernando Valley, and just got out of the service and about 3 weeks before the Sylmar quake hit Canoga, or hit Sylmar. And I remember going down San Fernando Road, and at that time, shortly after the quake, it looked like a wave had hit it. It was like you'd look at one or two houses in a row, there was no damage at all, and all of a sudden the third house would be totaled, and then another house or two would be fine, and then a house would be totaled. You could see it was like a wave. And my understanding, the way Northridge was explained to me, Northridge was more of an up and down kind of earthquake. It almost liquefied the dirt underneath it, where Sylmar was more of a rolling earthquake. Is there a distinction between the two? Is that pretty much correct, or?
Well, as you pointed out, every earthquake's a little bit different, and I'm not really sure the specifics of why they would have had different waves, generated. The Northridge earthquake was centered underneath the valley itself, and the San Fernando earthquake was centered actually out under the mountains a little bit. So, there may have been a relationship with the epicenters were a little bit different, but definitely I think sometimes what you can get is it just depends on the structure. Sometimes that maybe they're built differently, or that the land that they're built on may be a little bit different.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I remember I've gone through both of those earthquakes, and they seem to be a little bit different. And someone else, and you can, and please correct me on this if I'm wrong, but the difference between, say, a 6.2 and an 8.2 earthquake is not 2 points. 6.2 to 6.3, it multiplies. It's like a 6.3 is 100 times worse than a 6.2. Is that how it works?
It's pretty close. It actually, how we compare, different magnitudes of earthquakes. Let's say between a magnitude 6 and a magnitude 7. Basically, there's about 30 times the energy release in a magnitude 7 than a magnitude 6.
Wow.
And same thing between a magnitude 7 and 8. So, for each earthquake, or for each decimal point that goes up, you're looking at about 3 times more the energy released. So yesterday, we started with an earthquake in Japan. First, the U.S. Geological Survey was putting out that it was a magnitude 7.9. And that in itself is bad. But they ended up upgrading it to an 8.9. because they were able to get more data within several, like within about 30 minutes after the event occurred. So
wow.
it actually, it really made more of an impact when it became an 8.9.
Wow. Well, they were talking about the actual shaking. I guess Northridge shook for about 6 seconds. This thing shook for at least 2 minutes, anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes, depending upon who you talk to.
Correct. Yeah, it's when you get the larger magnitude earthquakes, you get the stronger shaking and the longer duration shaking. And one of the things you can think about is when the earthquake first occurs at the epicenter, it starts in that location, and then it rips along the fault. So the longer the part that rips, the longer the shaking you're going to feel wherever you are. And in this case, I know that I think the fault itself was more than 100 miles long that ruptured. And so if you think about it that way, if this fault is kind of ripping or it's like a zipper going across as the earthquake propagates along the fault.
Wow. We're having a conversation with Rick Wilson from the California Geological Survey.
Rick, what is the worst earthquake that you can remember or know about?
That's a good question, and it's probably within California. I can relate it to California more than other areas, but I would say for California, probably the biggest earthquake that we had in our state was back in 1700, before we had a written record in California. We were able to trace this earthquake based on a tsunami that actually occurred in Japan. We had a magnitude 9 earthquake off the coast of Northern California, where we have a subduction zone similar to what Japan has off their coast. And so here was a magnitude 9 that occurred that caused the tsunami that arrived in Japan. The Japanese were thinking, well, why is this tsunami occurred? They called it their orphan tsunami because it's not related to any earthquake, and they tied it back to an event that happened in 1700 in California. Obviously, the worst probable earthquake we experienced in California was the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, just from the sheer number of people that were killed and the amount of damage that was done.
I also understand that you can actually predict when earthquakes are going to take place. And if that's true, can you tell us when the next one's expected in California and where?
That would be great to know. I wish that we could look at our computers and plug in numbers and come up with something that we would know today or tomorrow or the next day when a large earthquake would occur. We can't really pinpoint or forecast an earthquake like that, but we can forecast based on long-term, recurrence intervals on these faults. We can kind of forecast what would happen in the next 30 years. And so, for example, for Southern California, I believe there's probably about a 30 to 40% chance of a magnitude 6.5 earthquake in the next 30 years. So we look at it in a long-term planning or long-term recurrence time, basically, and that's how we can tell when an earthquake can occur. But we really can't tell when exactly these earthquakes are going to occur.
There's also been a couple of people that have been on the news in the last couple of days relating the situation in Japan to global warming. Anything to say about that?
No, it's hard to imagine, that we'd have, impacts on the atmosphere and the ocean impacting the geology that much. The pressures within the Earth are so strong that really they're controlling themselves. So it's
Rick,
highly unlikely that we would experience something like that because of global warming.
Rick, it was interesting. I was watching somebody on TV trying to explain this, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but they were trying to explain the shift of two plates over each other and how that would kind of rip. Is that similar to what we have here with the San Andreas Fault? Is that something that could split and rip like that over a long period of distance, like, say, 100, 200 miles? Is that possible for an area like ours?
Yes, it is. I think the San Andreas is a very good example where you'd have a long rupture along it and producing close to a magnitude 8 earthquake. Very, it's a smaller thickness of rupture compared to what we saw in Japan. But it is definitely something that we have to be concerned about, and it has the potential of being a magnitude 8 earthquake.
Mm-hmm. Rick, at about the minute we have left with you, in your position, what would you recommend? What can we tell our listeners as far as preparation, since we're looking at a fairly high percentage of having another good-sized earthquake in the next 10 to 20 years? What would you like to see people do to be prepared for that?
Well, I think they can go to the Red Cross website, or what has been in the last recent years a shakeout event, which you may be familiar with, where in October every year they have people duck cover and hold on underneath their desks. So go to those websites and gather information about what you'd have to do to build an earthquake preparedness kit. And then also make sure that your structures are seismically safe. Invite an engineer to come over and take a look at it to make sure that your structures are up to snuff when it comes to earthquake preparedness.
One of the things that I watched, I think it was a 60-minute segment one time, and they were talking about, in case of an earthquake, do not get under the desk, but get next to the desk so that the desk doesn't crush you.
Now, yeah, there are a lot of different ideas out there, but it's been tested pretty strongly that if the desk is strong enough, you really want to get under it, because being close to a desk, you can still have things flying off the walls or flying, broken windows, glass coming at you. So it's if that desk is strong enough, or whatever you have that's very strong enough to get underneath, make sure you're underneath, cover your head and neck, and hold on.
Great. Rick, thank you very, very much for the time on a Saturday afternoon. I really, really appreciate it. This has been Rick Wilson with the California Geological Survey, and we'll be back in a minute on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.